This is KM Weiland, and you're listening to the 338th episode of the Helping Writers Become Authors podcast. My highlights this week included learning that my diesel punk novel Storming has a finalist for the Parable Award for Great Cover Design. Props to my awesome cover design team at Demonza for that. I was dubbed Jedi Master of the Word Players group, for which, of course, I had to don my Yoda ears and lightsaber for my acceptance speech. And, most importantly, drumroll please, I put a big fat red finished stamp on the first round edits of my historical superhero work in progress, Wayfarer. So yay! So it's off to my first round beta readers while I focus on putting finishing touches on the Characters Arcs course that will be releasing soon. The latest post on my blog is how to write scenes your readers will rave about. Great scenes are the building blocks of great stories. So learn the most important ingredient in how to write scenes that keep readers glued to the page. Visit my site at helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com to find out what it is. And now I hope you enjoyed this week's podcast entitled 6 Tips to Help You Finish Your Book. Every time I hear about a writer finishing a book, I want to jump up and down and go into a gospel choir of hallelujahs. It's a momentous accomplishment for 2 reasons. 1, finishing your book is the most important thing any writer will ever accomplish. And 2, not many writers do it. Seriously, depending on the source you examine, as much as 90% of the population wants to write a book. And many of those people will go so far as to actually begin writing something. But the percentage that actually finishes a book, minuscule. Why is that? Easy. Writing a book is hard. Even dedicated writers like you and me find it hard to keep at it when the going gets rough on a story that just isn't cooperating for any number of reasons. On Facebook, fantasy author Lee Diogenes shared the results of a poll from her writing group. She said, "Through a survey I set up on my group, I learned that the number one problems folks faced was completing a first draft or a project, a manuscript through all stages of revision, etc. I was a bit surprised, especially since many of them are story planners to some degree. The reasons for not finishing are varied, everything from new story ideas to fiddling with the outline and losing competence or interest to becoming confused by feedback, and more. Anyway, I thought this could be a topic that you might want to touch on in your blog sometime." So, if the most important thing a writer can do is also one of the hardest, finish your book, then don't you think it's time you tackle some of the major obstacles standing between you and the finish line? So let's take a look at the 6 most common reasons writers drop their manuscripts and how you can put habits in place to best every single one of them. Obstacle number 1, discouragement. You know the drill. You wake up one morning, all bright-eyed and excited to be a writer, only to open your Scrivener file, look at your manuscript, and realize this is complete rubbish. Or maybe your email just pinged with the alert that one of your critique partners had returned their edits and they don't really like the book. Ouch. Faced with these discouragements, you may find yourself tempted to throw in the towel. If you're never going to be any good, if this story isn't ever going to be any good, if it's going to take you the rest of your life to make it any good, then what's the point? So, the solution is to keep writing. You gotta keep trucking. Ain't no story, no wares that popped out perfect right from the word go. Ain't no writer, no wares, who feels good about his story every single day of writing it. Hemingway famously rewrote the ending to his Pulitzer Prize-winning Farewell to Arms 47 times. Personally, I have gone through periods of major doubt about every single book I've ever written. So is your book rubbish? Maybe. Is your critique partner right? Probably. That's not news any of us wants to hear, but there is good news to be had there, and this is it. Knowing the problem is halfway to solving the problem. Just in recognizing the issues, you're already a better writer than you were yesterday. And please note I said recognizing the issues. Use your brain here. Are you logically and reasonably identifying story problems? Or are you just in one of those moods where you feel like a failure? A writer's gut instinct is a powerful thing, but if you can't find a concrete, which is code for fixable, reason for hating your manuscript this morning, then stop beating yourself up over nothing and get back to work. Obstacle number 2 is distraction. Life is more distracting than ever these days. Real-world jobs, family demands, Twitter notifications, you name it. Our attention is dangerously fragmented pretty much all the time. And it's frighteningly easy to let all these distractions shove our writing into the back corner of our lives. Our writers' imaginations in themselves aren't always so helpful either. Most of us are idea machines churning out awesome new story ideas that are always and forever running off to dance with our muses and leaving us to sit forlornly at our keyboards with our half-finished manuscripts. Sometimes it feels like you're the one in detention while all the cool kids are playing uproariously outside in the sunshine. So what's the solution? Create priorities and stick to them. I never said the solutions were going to be easy. Sadly, there's no hack for turning off the distractions or the new ideas. There's only discipline. The ability to grit your teeth and keep writing past the distractions is possibly the single most important attribute of a successful writer. People ask me all the time how I get so much done. And the answer always comes back to one word: willpower. But first, you have to make sure your priorities are organized. When I was young, my mom read me a story about life priorities. Your life is like a big gallon jar. All the stuff in your life are rocks. The big stones are the big stuff: family, job, writing. The little rocks are everything else: Netflix, checking your email, going out for dinner, that kind of thing. So if you dump all the pebbles into the jar first thing, there's no room for the big rocks. But if you put the big rocks in first, turns out you can still pour some of those fun pebbles into the cracks. Determining you're going to sit down and write for an hour a day isn't going to get you very far unless you first structured your day in such a way that you have an hour. Same goes for shiny new ideas. You need a plan in place to grab and organize the ideas so they don't distract you from the project at hand. Obstacle number 3 is confusion. Let's say you've got those first 2 problems licked. You understand how to cope with the ups and downs of writing, and you've created a solid and professional writing schedule to keep your writing moving forward through life's distractions. But what about when you're halfway through your story and it just isn't working? Over my writing career, I've given up on 3 books. Ultimately, my confusion over the story's problems was the reason I gave up on every single one of them. After all, how are you supposed to finish your book when you don't know how to finish it? So the solution is to logically identify the story problems. There are 2 possible reasons a story isn't working. Number 1, it's broken. This does happen. There will be stories that, no matter how much you love them and how conscientiously you've tried to make them work, they just don't. And there comes a time when you have to know when to pull the plug on a broken story. Number 2 is that your story has a logic problem. Stories are logical beasts. If there's a problem with your plot or your characters, there's always a reason. The vast majority of those reasons are fixable. But before you can figure out how to fix it, you first have to identify the problem. So sit down with a notebook and a pen and start asking yourself questions on paper. Start with what you know. What feels wrong? What's bothering you? What don't you like about this story? And then start narrowing it down until you get to the heart of the issue. Knowing what's wrong with your story isn't a bad thing. It's a fantabulous thing. Knowing the problem means blowing away the confusion. Obstacle number 4 is lack of planning. You knew I was going to pull the old outline card out sooner or later, didn't you? Outlining your story before you begin the first draft isn't a guarantee you'll finish your book, but it will head off more than half the obstacles between you and the finish line. Most of the authors I meet who are struggling to find their story's end are struggling for the simple reason that they don't know the story's end. I faced this problem on my Portal Fantasy Dreamlander, which was the book that turned me once and for all into a confirmed outliner. When you don't know your end, you not only don't know what you're working toward, but you don't know how to set it up. And by the time you discover your ending, the story you've written so far may be entirely the wrong setup for that ending. Bam! Just like that, you're confronted with having to basically start your book all over again, hence the high abandonment rate. So the solution, of course, is to outline. And it really is that simple. I accept that outlining isn't a process all authors enjoy. And sometimes that lack of enjoyment can be prohibitive in itself. It's also possible to over-plan your story, which is an obstacle that I'm going to get to here in just a sec. But the fact remains that an outline is a tremendously powerful tool for helping you plan and execute this huge, rambling, complex problem that we call a novel. Now, here's another fact. I love outlining. It's one of my favorite parts of the process. It doesn't endanger my excitement about the first draft in the least. It empowers me to move forward in creating a story I completely understand from the outset. Now, of course, I've written extensively about my outlining process in my books, Outlining Your Novel and the Outlining Your Novel Workbook. And if you're interested in seeing an example of one of my own outlines, you can grab the complete transcript of my outline for my Dieselpunk novel Storming for free just for signing up for my email list. Obstacle number 5 is fear. There are a lot of reasons writers are afraid to move forward in finishing their manuscripts. The one I particularly want to focus on is the kind of fear that manifests itself in an obsession with tweaking. We see this kind of tweaking in 2 particular areas of the writing process: outlining and editing. So 2 questions I receive with some regularity are, how do I know when I should stop outlining? And how do I know when I should stop editing? So if you have to ask either of these questions, that it's probable you're dealing with a fear obstacle on some level. Although please don't get me wrong, attention to detail and the discipline to create thorough outlines and conscientious edits is a vital attribute for any writer. So what's the solution? Be honest about when to move forward. I am a massively in-depth outliner. My outline for my last book was 63,000 words and took me 3 months to finish, but I always know when it's time to stop outlining and start writing. How? Easy. I reach the end of the outline. I have the story completely mapped out. When I reach that point, I know it's time to move forward into the first draft. If I were to go back at that point and keep tweaking, I would be retrogressing, and I know it. Same goes for editing. When you reach the point where you have fixed all the logical, obvious problems, you're done. Unless and until you find another unforeseen logical problem to fix. Sitting there tweaking and tweaking, switching out commas, and agonizing over whether or not walked is the right word choice for that one sentence, probably not going to have a major effect on the overall quality of your story. Every part of writing brings its own challenges, and sometimes it's ridiculously tempting to just stay in the part of the process where you're at. It's familiar, safe even. Making the jump from outline to first draft or editing to querying is scary. But don't let fear hold you back. Set deadlines for yourself, and when you cross the finish line, don't hang around. Move on to the next race. Pull the trigger on that finished outline and go write that first draft. Pull the trigger on those edits and move on to the next book. Obstacle number 6 is lack of passion. So finally we come to perhaps the most disturbing of all the obstacles standing between you and the finish of your book. What if you just don't care about it? What if you wake up one morning and you realize you don't even like this story anymore? Maybe you never liked it. Either way, you just don't have the oomph in you to see it to the end. This can happen for a number of reasons. Perhaps you chose the wrong story in the first place. Perhaps in your attempt to create what you thought the market wanted, you turned it into a different story altogether. Perhaps you've changed as a person to the point where these characters and their problems just aren't doing it for you anymore. Regardless the reason, the magic is gone, and that faraway finish line looks like a trek through the Sahara with no water. So what's the solution? Give it some space. If you're not enjoying yourself, then just stop. Nobody says you have to write this book. Still, for many writers, there's a lot of guilt involved in giving up on a book. Not only is there all that pressure coming from the knowledge that to finish your book is the most important thing you can do as an author, but there's also the little fact that you've sunk months, maybe even years of work into this manuscript. Now, before I go any farther with this, let me remind you of what we all know. Writing is hard. That's just the way it is. Even on the best of projects, we all have days where we want to shut off the computer and never look at words again. Those are the moments when we have to put our discipline to work and keep on trucking. However, there's a difference between having the occasional bad day, or even month, with a project you love, and having completely lost the spark. You need to be able to recognize the difference. As important as it is to develop the habit of finishing manuscripts, there's no good reason to keep slaving away over a project that is irrevocably broken or that you just don't care about anymore. The first step is always to simply take a step back from the manuscript, put it on the back burner for a while. Go write something that ignites your passion. Perhaps this other project just needs you to gain a little objectivity about it. Absence does make the heart grow fonder and all that. Or perhaps that objectivity will bring the understanding and acceptance that in this particular case, not finishing is actually the right choice. Now, no matter which of these 6 obstacles you may be facing as you try to finish your book, there is a 3-step process you can take to identify and fix the problem. Number 1, identify the niggle. If you're feeling the niggle of a problem, whether it's a structural problem in your story or just the beginning of burnout, pay attention to that. It needs to be addressed from the outset, not ignored. Number 2, use logic to find the problem. Once you've acknowledged the niggle, you must go beyond the niggle. Gut feelings will only get you so far. If you don't know what's causing the gut feelings, then they will drive you crazy. So sit down in a quiet place and sift through your feelings until you can find the logical cause at their root. Probably it's going to be one of these 6 obstacles that we've talked about. And number 3, accept the solution. The worst part of any problem is knowing there's a problem without knowing what it is. Once you've used the above steps to figure out the specifics, the worst is over. From there, you have to be willing to accept and enact the solution, whether that means moving forward with discipline in prioritizing your writing, buckling down to some needed edits in fixing known plot problems that are holding you back, or sometimes even just giving yourself permission to step back from an unsolvable problem so you can move on to the next book. The only reason finishing a book is the hardest part of writing is because it's the whole of writing. Set yourself up for finish line success by focusing on each daily part of the process in meeting your goals, identifying obstacles, and overcoming them. Before you know it, you'll finish your book. And when you do, be sure to tell me all about it so I can start that chorus of hallelujahs. Thank you for listening to the Wordplay Podcast. To read a transcript of this episode, you can visit my website at helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com. And be sure to check back again next week.